This is astronaut Captain Daniel Reed broadcasting on emergency frequency from Europa base station. If anyone receives this transmission, do not send a rescue mission. I repeat, do not come to Europa. What we discovered beneath the ice is beyond anything in our worst nightmares, and it must never reach Earth. Our mission to find life on Jupiter's frozen moon was successful, but success has become our doom. 3 days ago, we detected movement in the subsurface ocean, something massive traveling beneath miles of ice toward our drilling site. When it arrived, the entire moon shook, and we realized we hadn't found simple alien fish. We had awakened something that had been sleeping in Europa's dark waters since before Earth was even formed. My crew is gone now, taken by things that rise from the depths on tentacles longer than skyscrapers, and I can see their glowing eyes approaching through the ice. They know I'm here, and they're coming for me too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Start from the beginning. Maybe if I tell this story right, someone will understand why we made the choices we did and why those choices doomed us all. 6 months ago, I was standing in my apartment in Houston, watching the morning news over a cup of bitter instant coffee. The reporter was talking about budget cuts to NASA, how the public had lost interest in space exploration. I almost turned it off when my phone rang, Dr. Nathaniel Vaughan from Mission Control, voice shaking with excitement. Danny, pack your bags. The consortium just approved Project Deep Ice. We're going to Europa. 3 years of training condensed into 6 months of hell. Physical conditioning that left me puking in NASA's centrifuge. Psychological evaluations that probed every dark corner of my mind. Technical briefings on equipment I'd never seen before. Drilling rigs designed to bore through 15 miles of ice, submersibles built to withstand pressures that would crush a submarine like a tin can. The team was small, myself as mission commander, Dr. Jackson Holloway for xenobiology, and technical specialist Miles Brennan for the drilling operations. 3 guys who'd never worked together before, heading to a moon 600 million miles from Earth with experimental technology and the weight of human discovery on our shoulders. The journey took 18 months. 18 months of recycled air, freeze-dried food, and the constant hum of life support systems. Jupiter grew from a distant dot to a swirling giant that filled our viewports, its great red spot watching us like a bloodshot eye. And there, spinning in its shadow, was Europa, pristine white surface hiding an ocean twice the size of all Earth's oceans combined. We landed at the equatorial drilling site on a Tuesday. The irony isn't lost on me now. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. The ice sparkled under Jupiter's reflected light, smooth as glass except for the geometric patterns of tidal fractures. So peaceful, so deceptively quiet. If I'd known what waited beneath that ice, I would have turned our ship around and headed straight back to Earth. But we didn't know, and by the time we learned, it was already far too late. The first thing that hits you about Europa isn't the cold, it's the silence. Complete, absolute silence that seems to press against your eardrums, even through the helmet comm system. Earth has background noise everywhere. Wind, traffic, birds, the hum of civilization. Europa has nothing, just the sound of your own breathing echoing in your suit. Base camp established, I reported to Mission Control, though the 18-minute communication delay meant any response wouldn't come for at least 36 minutes. Beginning surface operations. Jackson was already setting up the atmospheric analyzers, his movements careful and methodical. Even through the bulky EVA suit, I could see the excitement in his posture, the way he kept pausing to stare at the horizon where Jupiter dominated the sky, its bands of color shifting like a living thing. "Danny, you seeing this?" Miles called from the drilling platform. "The ice composition isn't matching our Earth-based models. It's denser, somehow, more crystalline." I joined him at the platform, watching as he calibrated the thermal bore. The equipment looked alien against Europa's pristine landscape, all angles and industrial purpose where everything else was smooth curves carved by eons of tidal forces. "How long to reach the ocean?" I asked. Miles ran his gloved hand along the drill housing, checking seals one final time. Original estimates said 3 weeks to punch through, but with this density reading, he shrugged. Maybe longer. The first day passed in a blur of system checks and equipment deployment. We established the communications array, set up the habitat dome, and began the preliminary ice samples. Everything was going according to plan, textbook perfect. That should have been the first warning sign. By day 3, we'd achieved a rhythm. Miles would run the drill in 8-hour shifts, while Jackson analysed the ice core samples, and I maintained contact with Earth. The drill sang as it worked, a high-pitched whine that seemed to carry farther in the thin atmosphere than it should have. Getting some interesting bacterial traces in the upper ice layers, Jackson reported during our evening meal. The rehydrated pasta tasted like cardboard, but after 2 days it was starting to feel like home. Nothing alive, but the chemical signatures suggest microbial life existed here relatively recently, geologically speaking. Define recently, I said. Maybe 10,000 years, could be less. Miles looked up from his equipment logs. The drill's moving faster now. Hit some kind of softer layer around the 2-mile mark. Should reach the ocean interface ahead of schedule. I felt a strange flutter in my stomach that had nothing to do with the low gravity. How much ahead? At this rate, week and a half, maybe 10 days. That night, I dreamed about swimming in dark water. Not unusual, I'd been having ocean dreams since we left Earth. But this one was different. The water was warm, and something large moved beneath me, just beyond the edge of vision. I woke with the taste of salt on my lips, which was impossible inside the habitat's recycled air system. Day 5 brought the first anomaly. Jackson was running spectral analysis on the morning's ice samples when his equipment started giving impossible readings. He called me over, frowning at the display screen. Look at this. Amino acid chains that shouldn't exist in frozen water, complex proteins that require active biological processes to maintain structure. Contamination from Earth? No way! We've been obsessive about sterilization protocols. Besides, these aren't Earth proteins. The chirality is all wrong, like looking at life in a mirror. Miles emerged from the drill housing, face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. Guys, we need to talk. I've been monitoring the borehole with the descent camera, and there's something down there, something that doesn't make sense. He pulled up the footage on his tablet. Grainy black and white images from 2 miles beneath us, the drill's LED array providing the only illumination. At first, I saw nothing but ice walls and the cylindrical bore shaft. Then Miles advanced the footage frame by frame. There, he said, pointing to a dark mass in the ice wall. See it? I stared at the screen. The shape was organic, curved like a section of spine or tentacle, but massive, easily 20 feet across, embedded in ice that should have been solid for millennia. How the hell is that down there? Jackson whispered. Ice shifts, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Tidal forces could have moved something from the surface down through cracks over time. Danny. Miles's voice was quiet, serious. That's not the weird part. He advanced the footage another few frames. The dark shape was gone. Just empty ice where it had been moments before. Equipment malfunction, I said quickly. Shadow from the drill assembly. But even as I said it, I knew I didn't believe it. The shape had been too detailed, too clearly defined, and the way it had vanished. That night, I lay in my bunk, listening to the drill's distant humming. The sound seemed different now, less mechanical, more organic, like a heartbeat echoing up from the depths. Miles was already at the controls when I emerged for the morning shift. His eyes were red-rimmed, and I realized he'd been awake all night. Couldn't sleep, he explained. Kept thinking about that footage. So I set up continuous monitoring. He handed me the tablet, and my hands went numb. The borehole camera showed the drill head still spinning and cutting through ice. But behind it, in the walls of the shaft we'd already carved, dark shapes moved just beneath the surface. Not one or two, dozens of them writhing like snakes through the frozen water. Jesus Christ, Jackson breathed from behind us. What are those things? I couldn't answer, because as I watched, one of the shapes pressed against the ice wall, and for just a moment, I saw something that looked almost like an eye, huge, intelligent, and very much alive. The emergency protocols were clear. Any sign of active biological material required immediate contact with mission control. But as I stared at the tablet showing those writhing shadows, all I could think about was the 18-minute communication delay. By the time we explained what we were seeing and got a response, those things could be anywhere. "We need to pull the drill," I said. Miles shook his head. "Danny, we're 8 miles down. The extraction process alone will take 6 hours. And if we stop now, we don't risk letting whatever that is get closer to the surface." "Or," Jackson said quietly, "we lose our only chance to study the first confirmed alien life forms in human history." The weight of that statement hung in the habitat's recycled air. This was it, the discovery that would rewrite every biology textbook, reshape humanity's understanding of our place in the universe. The find that would justify every dollar spent on space exploration. All we had to do was keep drilling towards something that was already watching us. We continue, I decided, but we establish new safety protocols. No one goes near the borehole alone. We monitor continuously, and we prepare for emergency extraction if things get weird. Miles laughed, but there was no humor in it. Weirder than giant sea monsters frozen in ice? Sure, boss. We established shifts. Jackson would monitor the biological sensors while Miles operated the drill. I would handle communications and coordinate with mission control. Simple division of labor that felt anything but simple when you were drilling towards something that might drill back. The next 6 hours passed in tense monotony. The borehole camera showed the drill head chewing through increasingly complex ice formations. The dark shapes were still there, more of them now, but they kept their distance from the cutting beam, almost like they were afraid of it or guiding it. "Getting stronger biological readings," Jackson reported around midday. "Whatever's down there, it's not just dormant. I'm seeing active protein synthesis, cellular respiration indicators. This stuff is alive and metabolizing." "How is that possible?" I asked. "The temperature down there is minus 40 degrees Celsius. Antifreeze proteins, maybe. Or some kind of biological heating system we don't understand. The energy readings are off the charts." Miles looked up from his controls. "Energy readings?" "Yeah, like thermal venting, but not geological. It's coming from the organic matter itself, as if these things are generating their own heat. If these organisms could generate enough heat to stay active in Europa's subsurface ocean, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And something that could thrive in conditions that would kill every Earth organism in seconds was something we knew nothing about. "New contact from mission control," I announced as the communication array chimed. Dr. Vaughan's voice crackled through the speakers, excited and demanding updates on our progress. I gave him the sanitized version, drilling proceeding ahead of schedule, interesting biological traces in the ice samples, no immediate safety concerns. Everything else, the moving shapes, the energy readings, the increasingly complex organic matter, I kept to myself. The bureaucrats back home would want us to stop, establish committees, spend months planning. We didn't have months. Besides, how do you explain to someone 600 million miles away that you're drilling towards something that might be drilling toward you? The afternoon brought new problems. The drill hit a layer of ice so dense it was almost metallic, progress slowing to a crawl. But the strange part was how the drill moved through it, not grinding and crushing like it should, but sliding as if the ice was parting around the drill head. "The thermal sensors are going crazy," Miles reported. "It's like the ice is responding to the drill's heat signature, flowing around it instead of melting." Jackson joined us at the monitoring station, his face pale. "Guys, I think we need to see this." He pulled up his latest analysis on the main screen. The biological traces from the ice samples looked nothing like anything in Earth's evolutionary tree. Complex, multi-layered cellular structures that seemed to shift and change as he watched. But what really caught my attention were the neural pathway indicators. "Are you telling me this stuff has a nervous system?" "Not has," Jackson said quietly. "Is. Danny, I think what we're looking at isn't individual organisms. I think it's all connected. One massive neural network spread throughout Europa's subsurface ocean." The habitat suddenly felt very small. "How massive?" I asked. Based on the ice core distributions and the energy readings Miles is getting, potentially moon-wide, we might be drilling into a single organism that's larger than Texas. Miles had gone very still at his control station. "Guys," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The drill just broke through. We crowded around his screen. The borehole camera showed open space, dark water extending beyond the reach of the LED array. We'd reached Europa's hidden ocean, 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and something was swimming up to meet us. The camera caught movement first, a pale, undulating mass rising from the depths. As it came closer, details resolved that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. Not tentacles exactly, but something between tentacles and neural dendrites, branching and rebranching into fractal patterns that hurt to follow. The entire structure pulsed with bioluminescent veins, creating patterns that seemed almost like language. "It's beautiful," Jackson breathed. The thing reached the drill head and began to wrap around it, not aggressively, but curiously, like fingers exploring a new texture. The drill's cutting beam shut down automatically as foreign material contacted the sensors. "Is it trying to stop the drill?" I asked. "No," Miles said, staring at his readouts. "I think it's trying to communicate with it." The bioluminescent patterns were changing, shifting from random pulses to something that looked disturbingly organized. Rhythmic flashes that reminded me of Morse code, or binary, or... "Oh shit," Jackson said suddenly, "the electromagnetic readings. Danny, this thing is generating massive EM fields. It's not just touching the drill, it's interfacing with it." As if responding to his words, every screen in the habitat flickered. For a moment, our displays showed not readouts and camera feeds, but something else, swirling patterns of light and darkness that seemed to move with purpose. Then everything went back to normal, except for the communications array which had started transmitting on its own. A signal was heading toward Earth, complex, organized, definitely not random noise. And according to the transmission logs, it had been broadcasting for the last 37 minutes. "What the hell did we just wake up?" Miles whispered. I stared at the camera feed, watching the creature's luminous tendrils explore our drill with what looked disturbingly like intelligence. The thing was learning about our technology, and now it was trying to talk to our home planet. 600 million miles away, radio telescopes would be receiving humanity's first message from alien intelligence. The problem was, we hadn't sent it. The transmission lasted 43 minutes before cutting off abruptly. During those 43 minutes, something on Europa sent 2.7 terabytes of data toward Earth, more information than our entire mission was supposed to collect in 6 months. "Can we decode any of it?" I asked Jackson, who had been staring at the raw signal data for the past hour. "It's not random," he said slowly. "There's definitely structure, patterns, mathematical relationships, but it's like trying to read sheet music when you've never heard of sound. The framework is completely alien." Miles hadn't said much since the transmission ended. He'd been monitoring the drill site, watching as more of those luminous tendrils emerged from the depths to investigate our equipment. The creatures, or creature if Jackson was right about the neural network, seemed fascinated by our technology. "They're not trying to destroy anything," Miles finally said. "Look at this." He pulled up the borehole camera feed. A dozen of the tendril structures had wrapped around the drill housing, but instead of crushing it, they were gently probing every surface, every joint, every sensor array. The bioluminescent patterns were constant now, pulsing in complex rhythms that reminded me of a heartbeat. "It's learning," Jackson said, "studying our materials, our construction methods, our power systems. This thing is reverse engineering human technology in real time." We'd always assumed that first contact would involve slow, careful exchanges, mathematical concepts, basic physics, gradually building toward communication. Instead, we'd stumbled into something that could absorb and understand our technology faster than we could understand it. My comm unit crackled with an incoming transmission from Mission Control. Dr. Vaughan's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Europa Base, this is Houston. We're receiving some kind of unscheduled broadcast from your position. Please confirm your transmission status and explain the nature of the signal." I exchanged glances with Jackson and Miles. "How do you explain that alien intelligence had hijacked your communications array to send messages to Earth?" Houston, this is Europa base. We're experiencing some equipment malfunctions with the communications array. Investigating now. The 18-minute delay stretched like hours. When Vaughn's response came, it was terse. Europa base, you are ordered to cease all transmissions until further notice. We're detecting massive interference with deep space network operations. Fix your equipment malfunction immediately. So much for honesty, Miles muttered. We'll tell them once we understand what we're dealing with, I said. Right now, we just create panic. Jackson looked up from his analysis. Danny, I think panic might be appropriate. I've been tracking the energy signatures from the ocean and they're increasing exponentially. Whatever this thing is, contact with our drill has triggered some kind of awakening process. As if responding to his words, the habitat's lights flickered. For a moment, the normal hum of life support systems was replaced by something else. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from Europa's ice itself. The whole moon is responding, Miles said, staring at his seismic readings. Low-frequency vibrations spreading out from our position like ripples in a pond. Whatever we woke up, it's big enough to make Europa itself sing. The vibrations continued for several minutes before fading to a barely perceptible hum, but the readings didn't return to normal. According to our sensors, Europa was now generating more electromagnetic activity than it had in the 6 months since we'd arrived. We need to consider extraction, I said. No, Jackson's voice was firm. Danny, this is the greatest discovery in human history. We can't just run away because it's bigger than we expected. We can't stay if it's dangerous. How do we know it's dangerous? Because it's alien? Because it's intelligent? Hell, maybe it's trying to help us. Miles snorted. Help us do what? Communicate. Understand. Maybe it sent that transmission to Earth because it wants to establish formal contact. Maybe we're the first humans it's met, and it's trying to follow our protocols. I wanted to believe that. The alternative, that we'd awakened something hostile with technology beyond our understanding, was too frightening to contemplate. But as I watched the borehole camera feed, showing more and more of those luminous tendrils emerging from the depths, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were losing control of the situation. The feeling became certainty when our drilling platform started moving. At first it was subtle, a slight shift in the platform's position relative to the habitat. Miles noticed it on his monitoring systems and went outside to investigate. Through the habitat's viewport, I watched him approach the drilling site, his movements cautious in the low gravity. Then he stopped walking and started running. Guys! His voice crackled through the comm. The platform, it's not just moving, it's being pulled. Something down there is dragging our equipment into the hole. I grabbed an EVA suit and rushed outside. What I saw defied physics and common sense. The massive drilling platform, which we'd anchored deep into Europa's ice with explosive bolts, was sliding toward the borehole. Not quickly, but steadily, as if something incredibly strong was reeling it in like a fishing line. Cut the cables, I ordered. Disconnect everything. Already tried, Miles said. The control systems aren't responding. It's like something else is operating them remotely. Jackson's voice crackled through our comms from inside the habitat. Guys, you need to see this. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's not just pulling on our equipment, it's interfacing with it. Our drilling platform is being absorbed into its neural network. I watched in fascination and horror as the platform disappeared into the borehole, taking with it millions of dollars worth of irreplaceable equipment. But more importantly, it was taking our only means of reaching Europa's ocean, or our only means of escape from whatever lived there. Houston is going to love this, Miles said grimly. That's when we heard the new sound, a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not mechanical, but definitely purposeful. Like a whale song, but bigger, more complex. It's vocalizing, Jackson said through the comm. The neural network is producing organized sound waves. It's trying to communicate with us directly. The sound grew louder and I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the metal of my EVA suit. Complex harmonics that suggested meaning, intelligence, intent. And underneath it all, something that sounded almost like laughter. We need to get back inside, I said. Now. As we retreated to the habitat, the sounds from beneath Europa's ice grew more complex, more purposeful, and far, far too close to the surface for comfort. Whatever we'd found in Europa's ocean wasn't content to stay hidden anymore. It wanted to come up and play. The question was, would any of us survive the game? The vocalization stopped at 0300 local time, replaced by something worse. Silence that felt deliberate, watching. I hadn't slept since the platform disappeared into the borehole. None of us had. We sat in the habitat's main compartment, staring at readouts that made no sense and listening to Europa's ice shift around us. "Any word from Houston?" Miles asked for the 12th time. I checked the communications array. Still receiving, but our outgoing transmission capability had been dead since the entity hijacked our systems. Nothing. For all they know, we've gone dark. Jackson looked up from his biological analysis station, face gaunt with exhaustion and something approaching awe. "I've been thinking about what that thing sent to Earth. 2.7 terabytes in 43 minutes. You know what that suggests? That it has better bandwidth than my internet back home," Miles said grimly. "No, it suggests that everything it transmitted was already prepared, waiting, like it knew we were coming and had a message ready to send the moment it made contact with our technology." "You're saying this was planned? Think about it. We land on Europa and immediately start drilling toward its ocean. No preliminary surveys, no gradual approach, straight down to where this thing lives. Almost like we were following a blueprint." Miles frowned. "The mission parameters came from years of orbital surveys. We chose this drilling site based on ice thickness measurements and thermal imaging." "Thermal imaging that showed what exactly?" Jackson asked. "Warm spots indicating subsurface activity. What if those weren't geological features? What if they were biological? What if this thing was showing us exactly where to drill?" I pulled up the original mission data on my tablet, the orbital survey images that had determined our landing site. Now, looking at them with new understanding, the thermal patterns didn't look geological at all. They looked organic, branching networks that resembled neural pathways or circulatory systems. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "We didn't find it. It found us." The habitat's lights flickered, and for a moment the life support systems hummed in a rhythm that sounded almost musical. When the lights stabilized, our screens were showing something that shouldn't exist. Live video feeds from inside Europa's ocean. The images were impossibly clear, as if we were viewing them through crystal rather than miles of ice and dark water. Vast chambers hollowed out of Europa's inner ice shell, connected by tunnels that stretched beyond the reach of any light source. And throughout it all, that luminous neural network, not individual creatures, but a single vast organism that had transformed Europa's entire subsurface ocean into its body. "How the hell are we seeing this?" Miles demanded. Jackson's hands flew over his analysis controls. "The electromagnetic signatures." "Danny, I think it's broadcasting these images directly to our equipment. It wants us to see this." The camera perspective, if camera was the right word, moved through the underwater caverns, revealing architecture that defied explanation. Not built structures, but grown ones. Organic formations that served the same purposes as rooms and corridors but followed biological rather than engineering principles. And everywhere signs of intelligence, tools that were part of the organism itself, storage chambers filled with objects that might have been art or scientific instruments or something beyond our understanding, a civilization that existed as a single vast living entity. "How long do you think it's been down there?" I asked. "Geological evidence suggests Europa's ocean has existed for hundreds of millions of years," Jackson said quietly. "If this thing evolved here naturally..." "It's older than complex life on Earth," I finished. "It was building civilizations when Earth was still covered in bacteria." The video feed shifted, showing us something. Scattered throughout the organism's living chambers were objects that clearly didn't belong, metallic fragments with geometric designs that looked artificial, manufactured. "Are those?" Miles began. "Spacecraft," Jackson confirmed. "Or pieces of them. Danny, I don't think we're the first to visit Europa. How many other expeditions had drilled down to that ocean? How many other civilizations had made contact with the entity and never returned home to tell about it?" As if responding to our thoughts, The video feed focused on a section of debris that was disturbingly familiar, twisted metal with markings that looked almost like Cyrillic script. The Russians, I breathed, the Gagarin mission. They claimed it was lost to equipment failure on the way to Titan. Maybe it was, Miles said, or maybe it made a detour. The feed continued, showing us chamber after chamber filled with the remnants of visitors from across the galaxy. Some recent enough to be recognizable as technology, others so old they'd been incorporated into the organism's own structure. A museum of first contact that suggested this entity had been collecting samples of alien life for eons. And now it was our turn. "We need to get off this moon," I said. "Now." Jackson shook his head. "With what?" "Our lander doesn't have enough fuel for a direct return to Earth. We need the orbital rendezvous with the supply ship. Then we radio for emergency extraction." "With what radio?" "That thing fried our transmission capabilities when it sent its little love letter to Earth." The video feed suddenly cut to black, replaced by our normal instrument displays. But the silence that followed felt expectant, as if the entity was waiting for our response to what it had shown us. "Why show us that?" I asked aloud. "What does it want?" My answer came in the form of seismic readings that made no sense. According to our instruments, something massive was moving beneath Europa's surface, not through the ocean but through the ice itself. Something ascending from the depths directly toward our position. "Impossible," Miles muttered, staring at the readouts. "Nothing that size could move through solid ice." "Unless the ice isn't solid anymore," Jackson said quietly. "Unless it's being restructured at the molecular level." The habitat began to vibrate, gently at first, then with increasing intensity. Through the viewports, we watched hairline cracks appear in Europa's pristine surface, spreading outward from our position in perfect geometric patterns. "It's coming up," I said. "The whole damn thing is coming to the surface." Miles grabbed his emergency gear. "We need to get to the lander if we can reach orbit." He was interrupted by a sound like thunder, but wrong. Too rhythmic, too musical. The cracks in Europa's ice widened, and something began to emerge. Not breaking through the surface, but flowing up through it like water, reforming the molecular structure of the ice as it rose. First came the tendrils we'd seen in the borehole camera, but larger, massive appendages that could have wrapped around skyscrapers. Then came structures that might have been sensory organs or communication arrays, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that painted Europa's surface in alien rainbows. And finally, something that could only be described as a face. Not human, not like anything that had ever existed on Earth, but unmistakably intelligent. Ancient eyes that had watched civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy, set in features that suggested both vast benevolence and incomprehensible purpose. It looked directly at our habitat, and I knew with absolute certainty that it could see us as clearly as we could see it. The entity that had turned Europa into its body had decided to introduce itself properly. And from the size of what was still emerging from the ice, our entire moon was just a small part of something much, much larger. The entity's face filled our viewport, massive beyond comprehension. What I'd initially mistaken for eyes were actually clusters of bioluminescent organs, each one larger than our entire habitat. When they focused on us, the intensity of their glow made the interior of our shelter flicker with alien light. "Move," I ordered. "Everybody grab emergency supplies and get to the lander. Now." But as Miles reached for the airlock controls, the habitat shuddered and began to rise. Not violently, more like being lifted by a gentle, impossibly strong hand. Through the floor viewports, I watched Europa's surface fall away beneath us. "It's picking us up," Jackson whispered. We were cradled in what might have been palm-like appendages, each finger the size of a city block. The entity was examining us the way a child might examine an interesting insect, turning our habitat slowly to get a better view from all angles. "The lander," Miles said urgently, pointing through the viewport. Our escape vehicle sat 200 meters away on Europa's surface, untouched by the massive restructuring happening around us, so close and completely unreachable. Jackson was frantically working his instruments, recording everything. "The bioelectrical readings are off the scale. This thing is generating more electromagnetic energy than a small star. How is it even possible? Doesn't matter how, I said. What matters is getting out of here before it decides we'd look better in its specimen collection. That's when the entity began to communicate. Not with sound this time, but directly through our nervous systems. Images, concepts, emotions flowing into our minds like a flood of alien consciousness. I saw Europa not as a moon, but as an organ in something inconceivably vast. A network of similar entities spread across the galaxy, each one inhabiting a different world, all connected by quantum entanglement across impossible distances. I saw civilizations rising and falling like waves on a beach, while this ancient intelligence watched and learned and collected samples of each one. Not out of malice, but out of a curiosity so profound it had shaped the development of life across 1,000 worlds. And I saw what it wanted from us. Jesus, Miles gasped, clutching his head. It's inside my brain. The entity wasn't just studying us, it was learning our language, our thought patterns, our entire species' approach to existence. Every memory we'd ever formed, every emotion we'd ever felt, was being catalogued and analysed in real time. But something else was happening. As the entity absorbed our thoughts, we were absorbing fragments of its consciousness in return. Suddenly, I could perceive Europa not as a frozen moon, but as a living organism with sensory organs distributed throughout its ice shell. I could feel the vast network of other entities scattered across the galaxy, sharing information through quantum channels we couldn't even detect. And I could sense its intentions. It doesn't want to hurt us, Jackson said, his voice filled with wonder. It wants to preserve us, add us to its collection of galactic civilization. Preserve us how? I demanded, though part of me already knew the answer. The images in our minds shifted, showing us the museum chambers beneath Europa's ice. But now I could see them for what they really were. Not just storage areas, but habitats. Perfect recreations of the home environments of every species the entity had collected, maintained in perpetual stasis so that each civilization could continue to exist exactly as it had at the moment of first contact. The Russian cosmonauts were still alive down there, living in a perfect replica of their spacecraft, unaware that decades had passed on Earth. They thought they'd been there for days, maybe weeks at most. Time moved differently in the entity's collection. We'd live forever, Jackson whispered. As specimens, I corrected. Zoo animals in the galaxy's most advanced terrarium. The habitat shuddered again as we were lowered toward Europa's surface, but not back to our original location. Instead, the entity was carrying us toward a section of ice that was flowing like water, opening to reveal chambers beneath. Our new home was being prepared. No, I said aloud, and I felt the entity's attention focus on me with uncomfortable intensity. We're not staying. The response came as a flood of concepts. Curiosity about our resistance, confusion about why we wouldn't want to be preserved for eternity, gentle amusement at our species' attachment to something as brief as individual existence. To this ancient intelligence, what we called life was just a fleeting chemical reaction. What we called consciousness was an interesting but temporary pattern in quantum foam. Our entire civilization would rise and fall in what it perceived as moments. Why wouldn't we want to be preserved at our peak? Because that's not living, I said, that's existing. More images flooded our minds, thousands of species that had made the same choice we were facing. Some had accepted preservation gratefully, recognizing the entity's offer as the greatest gift imaginable. Others had fought and been preserved anyway, their violent resistance eventually fading into acceptance as they realized the futility of struggling against something so vast. A few had been released back to their homeworlds, but only after the entity had taken everything it needed. Genetic samples, cultural artifacts, detailed brain scans of representative individuals. Those civilizations had returned home changed, carrying alien knowledge that transformed them into something no longer quite themselves. There has to be another option, Miles said desperately. That's when I realized something the entity hadn't anticipated. Our equipment was still active. While it had been focused on absorbing our minds, our instruments had been quietly recording everything, the electromagnetic signatures, the quantum entanglement frequencies, the bioelectrical patterns of its consciousness. We'd been collecting samples too. "Jackson," I said carefully, not wanting to broadcast my intentions to the entity monitoring our thoughts. "Can you access the emergency broadcast system?" He understood immediately. The emergency system was hardwired separately from our main communications array, designed to send a distress signal to Earth even if everything else failed. But more importantly, it could transmit our scientific data. "Maybe," he said, "but the range is limited. It'll take weeks for the signal to reach Earth." "That's not the point. The point is showing our host that we're not just passive specimens to be collected." I felt the entity's attention sharpen as it began to understand what we were planning. For the first time since first contact, I sensed something like concern in its vast consciousness. Miles caught on quickly. "If we transmit everything we've learned about its technology, its quantum entanglement network, the locations of its other collection sites, Earth would know where to find it," Jackson finished, "and how to fight it." The habitat began to shake as the entity's grip tightened. Not enough to crush us, but enough to demonstrate that our cooperation was not strictly voluntary. But we'd already made our choice. Jackson's hands flew over the emergency broadcast controls while Miles helped me compile our data. Everything we'd recorded about the entity's biology, its technology, its galactic network. Most importantly, the quantum frequencies that connected it to its fellow collectors across the galaxy. If Earth scientists could decode what we were sending them, they'd have a roadmap to every other world this ancient intelligence had claimed. "Signal transmitting," Jackson announced. The response was immediate and terrifying. Every bioluminescent organ on the entity's massive form blazed with light bright enough to blind. The ice beneath us began to crack and flow as the entity's emotional state destabilized its careful control over Europa's molecular structure. And for the first time in millions of years, the ancient intelligence experienced something it had almost forgotten. Fear. Not fear of death, something that vast and old was effectively immortal, but fear of exposure, of having its galactic collection network discovered and dismantled by younger, more aggressive civilizations. We'd just declared war on something that could manipulate the structure of matter itself. The question was, would we live long enough to see if Earth could fight back? The entity's rage manifested as pure physical force. Europa's surface buckled and reformed around us, ice becoming liquid, becoming gas, becoming something that existed in states of matter we didn't have names for. Our habitat tumbled through the chaos like a leaf in a hurricane, life support systems screaming warnings as they struggled to maintain pressure and atmosphere. "Hull integrity at 60%, Miles shouted over the alarms. "We've got breaches in sections 3 and 7. I grabbed the emergency repair kit, but before I could reach the damaged areas, the habitat slammed into something solid. Through the fractured viewport, I saw we'd been thrown against our lander, or what was left of it. The entity's tantrum had crumpled our escape vehicle like aluminum foil. "Well, shit," Jackson said with the calm of someone whose adrenaline had burned out. "There goes Plan A." The violent reshaping of Europa's surface stopped as abruptly as it had begun. We found ourselves in a crater roughly the size of a football stadium, surrounded by walls of ice that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. The entity had created an arena and we were the entertainment, or the specimen collection that had gotten uppity. Mental contact resumed, but this time it carried undertones of cold fury. Images flooded our minds, not the gentle communication from before, but forced downloads of information designed to overwhelm our human brains. I saw the entity's true age, measured not in millions but billions of years. I saw the rise and fall of galactic civilizations while it watched from the shadows, occasionally reaching out to preserve the most interesting examples before they destroyed themselves. And I saw what happened to specimens that proved difficult. The mental images showed us a chamber deep within Europa's ice, filled with the remnants of a species that had refused preservation. Not killed, the entity didn't seem capable of genuine malice, but restructured. Their consciousness had been edited, stripped of individual identity, and incorporated into the entity's own neural network. They still existed, but as components rather than individuals. A fate worse than death. eternal existence as living tools in an alien intelligence's vast mind. "It's giving us a choice," Jackson said quietly. "Accept preservation voluntarily, or have our personalities dissolved into its collective consciousness." "Some choice," Miles muttered. He was working frantically with the hull breaches, using emergency sealant to patch holes while our life support systems fought to maintain breathable atmosphere. "How long before those repairs fail?" "Maybe an hour," I said. "Less if the temperature differential gets worse." The entity's massive form shifted above us, rearranging itself to block our view of Jupiter and the stars. We were completely enclosed now, trapped in an ice prison that could reshape itself faster than we could escape. But as I watched the bioluminescent patterns pulsing through the walls, I realized something the entity might not have anticipated. Its own nervous system was incredibly complex, but it was still a nervous system, and every nervous system had vulnerabilities. "Jackson, what would happen if we could disrupt its neural pathways, create feedback in its quantum entanglement network?" He looked up from his instruments, catching on immediately. "Theoretically, it would be like a seizure on a galactic scale, but we'd need to generate electromagnetic interference on a massive scale." "What about our reactor?" Miles asked. "If we overloaded the fusion chamber?" "The explosion wouldn't be big enough to damage something this size," I said. "But the electromagnetic pulse might disrupt its neural activity long enough for us to—" I paused, realizing the flaw in my thinking. "Long enough for us to what? Our landers destroyed?" "Not necessarily." Jackson was studying his scanner readings. "The hull's compromised, but the fusion drive might still be functional. If we could reach it." Through the habitat's damaged viewport, I could see the twisted wreckage of our lander about 50 meters away. In Earth gravity, it would have been a quick sprint. In Europa's low gravity, wearing EVA suits, with a hostile alien intelligence trying to stop us. "It's suicide," Miles said. "So is staying here," I replied. The entity's mental contact intensified, as if it could sense our planning. New images flooded our minds, not threats this time, but promises. Perfect recreations of Earth environments where we could live in comfort for eternity. Advanced technology that would solve humanity's energy and environmental crises. Knowledge that would advance our civilization by millennia. All we had to do was submit. "It's not lying," Jackson said wonderingly. "It really would give us all of that. This thing has accumulated the scientific knowledge of thousands of civilizations. It could make humanity into gods. Domesticated gods," I corrected. "Pets in a cosmic zoo." The mental pressure increased, carrying emotional undertones designed to break down our resistance. Loneliness that had lasted billions of years. The weight of watching species after species destroy themselves through war, environmental collapse, technological overreach. The desperate desire to preserve something, anything, from the endless cycle of creation and destruction that characterized organic life. For a moment, I almost understood. This ancient intelligence wasn't evil. It was trying to save us from ourselves, to preserve the best of what we could become. How many civilizations had it watched burn out like brief candles while it remained eternal and alone? But understanding didn't change the fundamental problem. It wanted to preserve us as museum pieces, not as living beings capable of growth and change and choice. "I'm going for the lander," I announced. "Danny, no." Miles grabbed my arm. "Even if you reach it, even if the drive is functional, you can't pilot a damaged spacecraft alone." "Then come with me. The habitat life support won't last long enough for all of us to suit up and—" "Then you stay and maintain systems while Jackson and I make the run." Jackson nodded grimly. "The fusion drive has a remote activation system. If we can reach the lander and initiate overload, the electromagnetic pulse should disrupt the entity's neural network long enough to die in the explosion instead of being preserved forever," Miles finished. "Great plan. You have a better one?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. We began suiting up, moving quickly but carefully. The entity seemed to sense our preparations, and the ice walls around our crater began to shift and flow, growing higher and smoother. It was eliminating handholds, creating a perfect prison, but it had underestimated human desperation. "Jackson, can you access the habitat's construction charges?" I asked. "The ones we used to anchor the landing site." His eyes lit up. "Shaped charges designed to fracture ice. If we set them against the crater wall." "We blast our own exit," Miles finished. "Damn, it's crazy enough to work." The mental pressure from the entity intensified as it realized what we were planning. For the first time, the communication carried something like panic. Images of the damage we could cause, not just to itself, but to its entire galactic network. If our actions created feedback through the quantum entanglement channels, it could disrupt preservation sites across thousands of worlds. Billions of carefully maintained specimens could be lost. The entity couldn't allow that to happen. The ice walls began to close in, flowing like water to crush our habitat before we could execute our plan. We had minutes, maybe less. "Charges set," Miles announced. "Everybody grab something solid." "Wait," Jackson said suddenly. "I'm getting a signal. From Earth." "Impossible, the communication delay." "Not through normal channels. Quantum entanglement. They're using the same frequencies as the entity's network." He stared at his instruments in amazement. "Danny, Earth received our transmission, and they're responding." The signal was brief, heavily encrypted, but the meaning was clear. Earth had decoded our data and was taking action. Military assets were being repositioned. Scientific teams were analyzing the entity's quantum signatures. Most importantly, they'd identified 17 other worlds in our local stellar neighborhood where similar entities were maintaining preservation sites. Humanity was going to war. The entity's reaction was immediate and devastating. Every bioluminescent organ on its massive form blazed with fury as it realized the scope of what we'd triggered. The ice walls accelerated their collapse. "Blow the charges!" I shouted. Miles hit the detonator and our world exploded into light and sound and flying ice. The explosion tore through Europa's ice like a sledgehammer through crystal, sending massive chunks spinning into the thin atmosphere. For a moment I was flying, launched by the blast wave, tumbling in the low gravity while debris rained around me. My EVA suit's systems screamed warnings about impact damage and atmosphere leaks, but I was alive and moving toward the wreckage of our lander. Behind me, Jackson was limping across the fractured ice, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. Miles hadn't made it out of the habitat before the blast. Through my helmet comm, I could hear him cursing creatively as he worked to restore life support to the damaged structure. "Danny!" Jackson's voice crackled through the static. "The entity! Look up!" I raised my head and immediately wished I hadn't. The ancient intelligence was rising from Europa's depths in its full, terrible glory. Not just the face we'd seen before, but something that defied comprehension. A living mountain of neural tissue and bioluminescent organs that stretched from horizon to horizon. Individual tentacles the size of skyscrapers writhed against Jupiter's swirling backdrop, while clusters of sensory organs focused on us with the intensity of small suns. This wasn't just an alien intelligence. This was a force of nature that had shaped the development of life across the galaxy for billions of years, and we'd pissed it off. "The lander," I shouted, forcing myself to keep moving. "We have maybe minutes before it recovers from our little fireworks show." The twisted wreckage of our escape vehicle lay half buried in ice debris, its hull cracked open like an eggshell. But as I reached the fusion drive compartment, I realized our luck might finally be changing. The containment chamber was intact, and the electromagnetic overload system showed green status lights. "Jackson, can you access the remote detonation controls?" He stumbled toward me, his damaged arm leaving a trail of blood droplets in the vacuum that froze instantly into crimson crystals. "Give me 30 seconds. I looked up at the entity towering above us. 30 seconds felt optimistic. The ancient intelligence had stopped its ascent and was reorganizing itself, massive neural clusters shifting and realigning like a living computer rebooting after a crash. The bioluminescent patterns were changing, becoming more organized, more purposeful. It was adapting to our resistance, preparing a response that would end our defiance permanently. 10 seconds, Jackson announced, his fingers dancing over the lander's emergency controls. The entity's mental contact resumed, but this time it carried no attempt at communication or coercion. just raw, overwhelming force designed to shut down our nervous systems entirely. I felt my vision begin to blur as alien thoughts invaded my mind, trying to overwrite my personality with something more compliant. "Now would be good," I gasped. "Initiating fusion overload," Jackson said, and pressed the detonation control. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the lander's fusion drive began to sing, a high-pitched whine that climbed rapidly toward frequencies that made my teeth ache. The containment field was collapsing in a carefully controlled cascade failure, releasing the power of a small star in a burst of electromagnetic radiation. The entity's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Every bioluminescent organ across its massive form blazed white-hot as the electromagnetic pulse disrupted its neural pathways. The mental pressure in my head vanished, replaced by something that felt like screaming. Not audible sound, but pure anguish transmitted directly through quantum entanglement channels. Across the galaxy, I realized, other entities were feeling this pain as the feedback traveled through their shared network. Our small act of defiance was sending shockwaves through a civilization older than Earth's solar system. Europa's surface began to collapse as the entity lost control of its matter. Manipulation abilities. Ice became liquid, became gas, became plasma, as billions of years of careful molecular engineering unraveled in seconds. The subsurface ocean, no longer held in place by the entity's will, began to erupt through massive fissures. "The habitat!" I shouted, pointing toward our damaged shelter. Miles was still inside, trying to maintain life support while Europa tore itself apart around him. Jackson and I ran, or rather bounded in the low gravity, across the disintegrating surface. Behind us, the fusion explosion reached critical mass, and Europa's night side lit up like a second sun. The electromagnetic pulse spread outward at light speed, carrying our message of defiance to every corner of the solar system. We reached the habitat just as the shockwave hit. The reinforced structure held together, barely, but the life support systems finally gave up. Emergency power kicked in, giving us maybe an hour of breathable atmosphere. "Miles!" I shouted as we cycled through the damaged airlock. "Status report!" He looked up from a jury-rigged console, face pale but determined. "Good news and bad news. Good news. The communications array is working again. The entity's electromagnetic interference is gone. And the bad news? The bad news is that Europa is coming apart. The entity was the only thing holding this moon's geological structure together. Without it, the tidal stresses from Jupiter are going to tear this place to pieces." Through the habitat's cracked viewports, we watched the ancient intelligence collapse in on itself. Massive sections of neural tissue were dissolving back into the subsurface ocean, while others crystallized into formations that looked almost like coral. The entity wasn't dying, something that old and vast couldn't simply die, but it was fundamentally changing. Withdrawing. "It's leaving," Jackson said wonderingly. "Abandoning Europa entirely." "Can you blame it?" I asked. "We just broadcast the location of every preservation site in the galaxy to a species that declares war first and asks questions later." Miles was working frantically with the communications equipment. "I've got a signal from Earth. Multiple signals, actually. Military, scientific, civilian. Looks like our little transmission caused quite a stir back home. The primary message was from Dr. Vaughn at Mission Control, but it carried authorization codes from much higher up the chain of command. The content was brief and urgent. A rescue mission was already en route, launched within hours of receiving our data transmission. More importantly, Earth's combined space agencies were mobilizing to investigate every stellar system where we'd detected entity signatures. Humanity had learned of the Galactic Preservation Network, and we were doing what humans do best, turning a discovery into a military objective. "How long until rescue arrives?" I asked. 18 months, Miles said grimly, assuming Europa doesn't completely disintegrate before then. Outside, the moon's surface was reshaping itself one final time. The massive geysers of subsurface ocean were freezing into fantastic ice sculptures, while the remaining neural tissue formed geometric patterns that might have been art or science, or a goodbye message we'd never understand. And in the center of it all, where the entity's greatest concentration of consciousness had been, Europa's ice was forming something new, a structure that looked almost like a monument or a gravestone, a marker for the end of something ancient and irreplaceable. "We won," Jackson said quietly. "Did we?" I asked. "We've destroyed a civilization billions of years old, scattered a galactic preservation network that might have been the only thing preventing the permanent extinction of countless species. In our rush to maintain our freedom, we might have doomed the galaxy to forget its own history." Miles looked up from his instruments. "The entity isn't gone," he said. "The quantum entanglement readings, it's still there, just distributed differently, hiding in the quantum foam maybe, or existing in dimensions we can't perceive. So it could come back. Maybe. Or maybe it's learned that some species aren't worth preserving." The thought was sobering. We'd proven that humanity would choose freedom over security, conflict over preservation, the right to make our own mistakes over the guarantee of eternal existence in someone else's museum. Whether that made us admirable or terrifying probably depended on your perspective. As Europa continued to tear itself apart around us, I began composing my final report to Earth. Someone needed to document what we'd learned here, not just the scientific discoveries, but the moral implications of what we'd done. We'd made contact with an intelligence older than complex life on Earth, and our first act had been to declare war. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would we. 18 months. That's how long we lasted on Europa's dying surface before the rescue ships arrived. 18 months of rationing oxygen, recycling water through increasingly unreliable filters, and watching Jupiter's frozen moon tear itself apart piece by piece. Miles died on day 412. A seal failure in the habitat's main compartment, the kind of routine maintenance issue that would have been easily fixable if we'd had proper equipment. Instead, we watched our friend and colleague suffocate while jury-rigged life support systems failed around us. Jackson and I buried him in Europa's ice, marking his grave with a piece of twisted metal from our destroyed lander. He never lived to see Earth's response to our discovery. The rescue fleet that finally reached us consisted of 12 ships, officially a scientific expedition, but I recognized military retrofits when I saw them. The crew that extracted Jackson and me from Europa's ruins spoke in clipped professional tones and asked very specific questions about quantum entanglement frequencies and neural network disruption patterns. By the time we reached Earth, humanity had already made contact with 3 other worlds where ancient entities maintained their preservation museums. The results were mixed. One entity had withdrawn immediately upon detecting Earth's military approach, dissolving its collections and fleeing to regions beyond our detection. 17 preserved civilizations, some dating back millions of years, simply vanished into quantum foam rather than risk exposure to aggressive newcomers. Another had attempted to communicate, offering the same bargain it had presented to countless species over the eons: preservation in exchange for submission. Earth's response had been swift and decisive. Nuclear detonations in carefully calculated patterns had disrupted the entity's neural pathways, forcing it to retreat to dormancy while human scientists studied its technology. The third entity had chosen to fight. The war lasted 6 months and resulted in the complete sterilization of 2 star systems. When the smoke cleared, humanity controlled advanced matter manipulation technology and quantum entanglement communication networks that would accelerate our technological development by centuries. We also controlled empty worlds where the screams of dying civilizations echoed through abandoned preservation chambers. I spent 3 years in debriefing sessions, psychological evaluations, and technical consultations. Government officials wanted to understand every detail of our first contact experience. Scientists wanted to reverse engineer the entity's technology. Military strategists wanted to know how to fight similar intelligences more effectively. Nobody seemed interested in discussing whether we'd done the right thing. Jackson adapted better than I did. He threw himself into xenobiology research, helping design the scanning protocols that would locate other entity networks throughout the galaxy. The last time I saw him, he was preparing for another deep space mission, this time with enough firepower to level continents. "We're explorers again," he told me, finally moving beyond our solar system, making contact with intelligences we never dreamed existed. "We're conquerors," I corrected. strip mining ancient civilizations for their technology. He shrugged. Same thing, depending on your perspective. I retired from active service and bought a small house in Colorado, far from the space centers and research facilities where humanity was reshaping itself with stolen alien knowledge. Sometimes I dream about Europa's subsurface ocean, about the museum chambers filled with preserved civilizations that we destroyed in our panic to remain free. But mostly I dream about the entity's face when it realized what we were, not another species to be catalogued and preserved, but something fundamentally different. Something that would choose destruction over domestication, chaos over eternal security. Something that scared a billion-year-old intelligence badly enough to make it run. The quantum communication networks we inherited from the entities occasionally detect signals from the deep galaxy, fragments of the vast intelligences that once maintained the preservation museums. They're still out there, hiding in dimensions we can barely perceive, watching as humanity spreads through the stars with technology we barely understand. Sometimes I wonder if they're planning their return. Other times I wonder if they're simply waiting for us to destroy ourselves with the power we stole from them. But mostly, I sit on my porch in Colorado and watch the stars, knowing that we're not alone in the universe. We're just the scariest thing in it,